With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Have you ever seen something in the woods you just can't explain? Maybe it was tall, hairy, and not quite human? If you've had a Bigfoot encounter and you're ready to tell your story, there's a place where you'll be heard without judgment. Check out the Bigfoot Society podcast hosted by Jeremiah Byron. It's a safe space for individuals to share their Bigfoot experiences and be part of a growing community of witnesses and believers. Jeremiah is all about listening with an open mind, and your voice matters here. If you've got a story to tell, reach out to him directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Again, that's bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Don't keep your encounter to yourself. Share it on the Bigfoot Society podcast. On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Maxim Furek on with me. Now, he is the author of several books, and I'm just going to name a few right off the bat, and I'm sure that some of the other books will come up in conversation. But today we will be talking and covering a couple of things out of two specific books. First, Coal Region Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit, and also The Lost Tribes of Bigfoot, which is Maxim's most recently released book. And you might have seen also Flying Saucer Esoteric, The Altered States of Ufology. But as I said, there's a couple of other books that Maxim has also written as well. Maxim, welcome on the show, finally.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. It's been a while, but this is great. I think the Buddhists say that, nothing happens until it's time. So I guess it's the time, and this is great. So thanks for the invite and for having me on your program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with the Buddhists in that assessment as well. So, Maxim, you have a fascinating background. And before we get to, why and how did you get into the paranormal, will you discuss a little bit about your quote-unquote other background first?
Yeah, I'm a former psychologist. And by that, I specifically worked in addiction. So I was very much involved in addictions and recovery. And I developed an affinity for substances of abuse, emerging substances of abuse. And I was just fascinated by all of the themes that surround drug use. For example, the placebo effect, where they could give a college kid barbiturates and tell them that they're stimulants, and the kid will have a stimulant effect, or give them a stimulant and tell them it's a barbiturate and they'll have that effect. So it's mind over matter. For some reason, the mind can go and hijack all those physiological effects and take over. Another example might be a heroin user that goes to a different place, a different setting, and shoots up and doesn't get high. And there's just some mechanism there that just kicks in that they don't get high. Another example, Vietnam veterans that were addicted to heroin over in Southeast Asia came back and were able to kick the habit, which is like just amazing when you hear those stories. But again, it was about the setting. They were into another setting, and it was a different mindset. But just going on with that, for a short amount of time, I was doing programs, anti-drug programs about emerging drugs of abuse, and one of which I did in Las Vegas at a conference. But I was very much involved in drugs like ecstasy, MDMA, ketamine, all these designer drugs and bath salts and all these drugs that promise euphoria, promise better sex and music and everything else. But a lot of times what they deliver is psychosis. And these individuals end up either, psychotic or dead or whatever. So I was fascinated by that, by what those drugs could do and how they worked on the system. And again, it's just like an amazing thing. We're always finding out new things about substances For example, that there's a specific receptor site for THC, for marijuana. And why is that? I mean, why were we born with a receptor site for pot? I mean, explain that one to me. But just a lot of things like that. So that's my background. And, but I've moved on. I just got, commandeered into the paranormal, and it was a total fluke. It wasn't anything that I was looking for. The paranormal stalked me and found me. And so here I am. I'm a paranormal author.
It's funny how that happens, right? But it's meant to be, as they say.
Exactly. I mean, everything is meant to be. Everything is the way it is. I mean, don't think in terms of circumstance and probability and all that. I mean, it's just like everything's destined, everything's planned, everything. I mean, our conversation today and people listening, all of that is just like preordained, and it's kind of it's awe-inspiring. But I think it was Einstein that said that the universe, the one of the mysteries of the universe is that it's knowable. We can figure it out. Man, with our cognition, we can figure out what's going on and put two and two together. And we talk about these mysteries, but I think we're certainly in the realm of the paranormal. We're getting closer to discovering, some of the secrets and unlocking the mysteries and all that. And I'm just so glad to be a part of this, because it's like we're kids in a sandbox and we're trading stories and toys and theories, and this is the exciting thing, to be a part of this massive energy that with a lot of a lot of progressive thinkers, and not all of us, but some of us. But it's great to be part of that group.
Maxim, with your background that you just mentioned, what is your opinion of those who choose to take the real stuff now, the real pure DMT, to try to take what they claim is an actual trip to meet other entities or go other places? What is your opinion on that? Or have you had contact with people that have taken DMT?
Well, I have friends that have gone down to Kentucky for an ayahuasca trip. And with that, it takes you to the bottom. I mean, it's like a nightmarish experience. And then after that, after you go through that, then you have the clarity and the euphoria and the lucidity of seeing things and being more aware. So people are using substances, as a means of perception. I know that not too long ago, Johns Hopkins was experimenting with psilocybin, and they believed that they could unlock the secret to spirituality. That those of us who are, are very spiritually minded, with through prayer and meditation, that we reach certain heights. And Johns Hopkins believed that through psilocybin, they could do the same thing by unlocking those pathways. So I think that we can do that. I think like drugs like ketamine and ecstasy, I hear a little bit of reverb right now, but a drug like ketamine makes you feel that there's no barriers, that you're a part of everything. So ketamine is a drug that for me tends to represent, maybe the ability to know the paranormal. And then with ecstasy, MDMA, here's a drug where you have affinity a lot, you like everybody and you love everybody and you espouse that. So again, here's two drugs that open up pathways, of communication. And even with Stephen Greer's CE5, it's almost like another form of new ageism, using not only drugs but also meditation and that communal thing to go and maybe evoke, the spirit of the Greys and to make contact. So whether it's through drugs or through just prayer and meditation, I think that we have some kind of ability to tap in to some of these channels. I think that some people have that. I call it altered states of perception. I certainly don't. And the reason that I don't, I mean, maybe I do, but the reason that I've never discovered is because I'm too busy doing the 9 to 5, doing the reading and the writing and the podcast and all that. If you want to tap into your innate abilities, you need to go and take the time to do the work. And that's prayer, meditation, that's you make it a project, you make it your job, and you could go and open up whatever, it is that we have. And I think that, that humans have innate abilities, but so much of it is covered over by the commercialism and the white noise and all of the distractions that we have in our in our society. So that's my belief, but I believe that there are people that have abilities. I've spoken with some of these folks, and it's not just one single individual, but it seems to be families, it seems to be communities that have the similar abilities.
So before we move into covering a little bit out of two of your books, have you had any personal paranormal experiences?
Yeah, I have. I'm a Vietnam vet. I was a radarman aboard the USS Constellation during the Vietnam conflict, and I saw numerous UFO sightings. And what we did was we would put those in the logbook, and I document this in Flying Saucer Esoteric, one of my latest books. But we would see these UFOs, and we would put them in a logbook with their range and bearing. And then the commanders would tell us to keep our mouths shut. Don't talk about this. And I would go through some of these logbooks and just see all of the numerous sightings that were there. The next day, the logbooks would disappear, and there would be fresh logbooks, and they would start all over again. But, I attend my Navy reunions on an annual basis, and I talk to my buddies, and we talk about this. And yes, we saw things, and yes, we were told not to talk about them. But whatever it was that we saw, we identified them as UFOs. They were anomalous. And back then, as today, 3% of the things that we see are anomalous, and they could be either ours, theirs, or either extraterrestrial, or as Jacques Vallée says, interdimensional. So take your pick. All we know is that 3% we can identify. And one thing that I find really kind of interesting, a lot of times I'll jump on YouTube and watch an old 1950s black and white sci-fi movie. I mean, I just love that stuff, because I grew up with it. But there's one, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, that was Ray Harryhausen who did the special effects, this stop animation with the saucers going into the Pentagon and all the Washington Monument. But at the beginning of Earth versus the Flying Saucers, this military intelligence guy talks about life on other planets and all this other, scientific stuff. But he says that at the end of the day, 3% of what we see cannot be explained. And that was 57. And they're saying the same thing today in 2025, 3%, take your pick. It's anybody's guess what they are. But there's plenty of anomalous things that we're seeing not only in ufology, but also in the realm of cryptozoology. And we don't know what they are. We're just, we have our theories and our hypotheses, but nobody really knows.
Yeah, logbooks disappearing. That's a new one, huh, Maxim? I mean,
I guess, but
gee, never heard that before.
With a couple of things with my naval experience. I was on an aircraft carrier called the Constellation, and we did combat ops with other carriers, including the Bonhomme Richard. And of course, this has nothing to do with the paranormal, but it does have something to do with conspiracy theories. And the commander of the Bonhomme Richard was Commander Morrison. And you might have heard of a guy from Venice, California, from Melbourne, Florida, and then to Venice. But that was Jim Morrison of the Doors, and his dad was in charge of the Bonhomme Richard. So we were out there with Commander Morrison, and never met the guy, but I wrote some articles about the conspiracy theory that pertained to him. And I don't know, Shannon, have you heard about that? The USS Liberty and Commander Morrison?
It's not ringing a bell right now, no.
Okay. During the Six-Day War between Israel and Egypt, the Israelis sunk the USS Liberty. It was a spy ship, and they claimed that it had the same profile as an Egyptian spy ship. But Commander Morrison said that they did this intentionally. Commander Morrison said there should be political and economic reprisals against Israel. And When Jim Morrison died, he died ostensibly of a heart attack induced by heroin. And Jim Morrison was a pathetic alcoholic. And my theory is, and I've written about this and I've been warned about this, again, to keep my mouth shut, but that maybe the Israeli Mossad, the hand of God, went over there with a hit team and they killed Jim Morrison only as a payback to Commander Morrison for, what he was saying. So again, an unproven theory, but, with Project Mockingbird, where the CIA is embedded with reporters and journalists, and the CIA will go and monitor the stories that are disseminated over the wire services. Consider this, when was the last time, or maybe the only time, that you ever heard of the USS spy ship, or the spy ship Liberty? And nobody talks about the anniversary of the sinking. It's just non-news. It's almost like it's blacked out. And, if we are to believe that the CIA does have Project Mockingbird and that they're controlling the news stories that we see, then, this makes sense to me that that there's, with all the conspiracy theories, there's a little germ of truth, surrounded by all the innuendo. So I don't know. I think there's something going on, and something and nobody's telling me what it is, but that's my conjecture. Something happened, and I think it was just payback to Commander Morrison for mouthing off. So I don't know.
So before we move off of this, was the craft that you saw the same each time, or were these different shaped crafts?
No, it would be different. And what you would see is, we would call them bogies. They're UFOs. So here's a solid contact, and you could gauge the range and bearing. But here's the thing: solid contacts, not marsh gas, not ducks, not a reflection from Venus, not something that I saw because I was hallucinating. None of that. These were, not what we called sea return or garbage. None of that. These were solid contacts, maneuverable contacts that were faster than any guided missile we had, or any guided missile the USSR at the time had. So again, this is pretty amazing, and it reminds me of the 2004 TikTok video off the coast of San Diego. It was the USS Nimitz, another Navy aircraft carrier, and the Navy pilots shot this video of this thing that zigged and zagged, sharp turns that no human being could withstand because of the G-force. And then this thing hovered. And remember, back then, the Pentagon changed the nomenclature from UFO, from unidentified flying objects, to UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. But this thing, the San Diego blip, went under the water. So now it's an unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And now we're talking about these saucers going under the water. So, things are changing. But I do want to say that 2024 UFO video shot by Navy pilots seems to be one of the most authentic pieces of evidence that we have. And it's really hard to dispute that. I mean, so many people have looked at it. So, there's reason to believe.
All right, so let's shift gears. Now, I would like to close with a discussion about the Sheppton Mine. But before we go there, let's talk about a couple of bits from your book, The Lost Tribes of Bigfoot. And something that I emailed you a couple of things from the book that I would like you to cover. And one section that stood out was the Gow Gow section. And I would just love for you to chat about those guys. They're a little bit unique.
Yeah, and this is something that you rarely hear about, but in The Lost Tribes of Bigfoot, I try to take a look at some of these theories about what Bigfoot could be. And this would include Neanderthal. It would include Australopithecus, Lucy, the man's earliest relative. This was the skeleton that was developed, that was found in Ethiopia back in 1974. And it had the upper body of an ape and the bottom of a hominid. That was one possibility. But what you were talking about with the other creature, that was from British Columbia. And Here's the thing. In 1958, when we started to talk about the California abominable snowman, and it was the Humboldt Times that had an article calling this abominable snowman Bigfoot, 1958. So that hit the wire services. That name Bigfoot became ingrained, entrenched in everybody's vocabulary around the world. But the paper received thousands of letters from these people, from readers claiming that yes, they believe in Bigfoot or yes, they have seen Bigfoot. But what happened was after 58, we started to realize that this thing called Bigfoot had been called Sasquatch and had been reported for thousands of years in British Columbia by the coastal peoples. So what you were referring to in my book, The Lost Tribes of Bigfoot, there were countless legends of creatures that were cannibalistic, that were as big as a ship, that had a pouch to carry humans and to eat them, and all this stuff. It was just like an amazing array of monsters and beasties. But with the coastal peoples in British Columbia, they felt that to see Sasquatch was a spiritual thing. It was a wonderful thing. And that also that Sasquatch was the protector of the environment, and that believed that we should be the stewards of the environment. And so it was interesting that what we discovered in 1958 with Bigfoot was something that had been around for thousands of years, but the white man just didn't know about it.
So, what are some things that when you were researching for the Lost Tribes of Bigfoot, was there anything that was surprising to you or something that you didn't know?
I wanted to find out why people, what was the search all about? Why were people, so keen on going out there into the woods looking for this thing that a lot of people haven't found and a lot of people never will find. But I think what it is, and again, it's not so much that, I have a background, in psychology, but I just think that human beings have an innate drive. We have this curiosity. We need to create, we need to discover, we need to climb that mountain. We need to find the Holy Grail. I think there's a little bit of Indiana Jones in all of us. And we're not unique. I mean, we all do the same thing. And I think as far as I'm concerned, I'm on this journey of discovery, looking for something. And I don't know where it's going to end. I don't know the destiny, don't know the destination, but along the way, I'm just meeting a whole lot of wonderful people and doors are opening and, I'm having the best time of my life or maybe living my best life. But again, I think it's that curiosity. So humans have to find out. And that's why we're looking. That's why and that's why the paranormal is just such a fascinating topic. In my book, Coleridge Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit, I tried to take the spiritual and the paranormal and put them closer to the scientific. And again, I think that everything's the same. I think that a lot of this, the spiritual and paranormal, slots into the scientific, but we just don't know how. So we call it supernatural just because we don't know the scientific mechanism that allows these things to happen. And I'll give you an example. Probably the easiest example is watching an apple drop, cause and effect. The effect is the apple is dropping. The cause is Newton's theory of gravity. So that's an easy one. But what about when you see orbs in the sky or you see cryptids or you see other things, you know, it may and probably does have a scientific explanation, but at this point, we just don't know what that is. So, we're all looking for the answers.
So, what's maybe one of your favorite or an encounter story that stands out to you from your book?
Yeah, my neighbor, Joe, stand-up guy, hospital technician, family man, churchgoer, overachiever, just, the whole family, just very solid, stable, nice citizen. And we were out for dinner, my wife and I and Joe and his wife, and he just nonchalantly told me that he had seen two Bigfoot creatures. And he was pulling out of a cemetery, paying respects to his son. who had passed, and he saw on the trailhead there were two Bigfoot creatures. One was black, and the other, which was larger, and then one was cinnamon colored. And I questioned him at length, and then I questioned him again another time, and he said that the Bigfoot creatures looked at him like they were curious, and then they walked away like human beings with a stride like a human being. Now, he's claimed that they were Bigfoot, not humans, but they walked like humans. And then my wife and I did go out there looking for tracks. We couldn't find anything, but I did report this. There's researchers in Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is unique that we have a number of people that sort of are documenting all these things. One of them is Stan Gordon from Western Pennsylvania, and I called Stan and gave him the account, and then Stan called my friend Joe to take it down and then documented that. But the one thing about Pennsylvania is that a number of resources claim that Pennsylvania is the number 3 state with Bigfoot sightings after California and after Washington state. So then it's Pennsylvania or maybe even Florida with the skunk ape, but it's either Pennsylvania or Florida that has the most sightings. And I'm a snowbird. I spend winters in Florida and summers in Pennsylvania, and I'm either looking for the skunk ape or for a Bigfoot. And so far, I have found neither, but I'm going to keep on looking.
That's part of the fun, isn't it? So how many times have you heard an encounter where you go, oh gosh, well, I want to see a Bigfoot, but I don't know about that particular set of circumstances?
No, the only one that was, problematic, I talked to one guy that claimed he saw Bigfoot at 15 feet and he developed PTSD from the sighting.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people I talked to, like Joe, my neighbor, he was in awe. Other people, there was a case back home where a friend of mine who's in law enforcement, he got a call from an elderly gentleman, 11 o'clock at night. This guy was letting his dog out, to go to the bathroom and saw this cryptid, this Bigfoot that was maybe 12 foot tall. The man wasn't afraid. He said that the Bigfoot had kind eyes. It had kind eyes. And in most of these Bigfoot reports, Bigfoot is elusive. It goes away. It doesn't want a confrontation. It does not attack people. It's non-aggressive. I know we've had a couple of documented stories about the Ape Canyon, and also I know Teddy Roosevelt wrote about a Bigfoot encounter that possibly could have killed a hunter. But those are the only 2 episodes that I can recall. So Bigfoot tends to be elusive, doesn't seem to be aggressive. It tends to have some sort of abilities. Some people feel that they're telepathic and they communicate that way. Some people say that they glide, they don't walk, that they have bilocation or rapid transport where you see them in front of you, then behind you. They talk about Bigfoot emitting light from their eyes rather than reflecting lights, and just a lot of things. But the one article that was in the New York Times, I believe it was, about Bigfoot, the reporter concluded that Bigfoot is pretty boring, that, a Bigfoot sighting is nothing dramatic. It's not life-threatening. It's just something that you see this creature and you're probably filled with awe and wonder, and then you go on with your life. But the only sighting I had, I wanted to talk about this, and because it fits in with this, but last year my wife and I were walking in Pennsylvania along the Susquehanna River, and there's this pathway next to the river that is usually flooded out. And so here it was dry, so we decided to go down there and just look. And we're walking, and in the distance I saw this black shape. Now, of course, I immediately thought it was Bigfoot, or wanted it to be Bigfoot, but I didn't confabulate. I didn't make anything up, but the shape is coming towards me. It ducked behind a tree. It walks towards me, and we're talking like 1001, 1002, 1003, maybe 3, maybe 4 seconds. It comes closer, and here it's a woman wearing a fur-like jacket with the extended shoulder pads.
Oh.
And it came towards me, and I realized that it was a woman, it wasn't a Bigfoot. But for those 3 seconds, I was filled with that awe, that discovery, that feeling, that wonderful feeling of what it would be like to have seen a Bigfoot. And although it wasn't, in my mind's eye, it was, and I'll never forget that. And I talk about this, but it was a feeling of a wonderful feeling of awe, maybe even a spiritual feeling. But that was me. That was my mind seeing something and coming to a conclusion. It was erroneous, but still in my mind, it was maybe what I wanted to see. And this is something that's important and significant to me. But no, it wasn't a real Bigfoot. But yes, in on a certain level and a certain dimension, it was. And so I hope I'm saying that properly. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I saw anything other than what I saw was sort of an illusion, but it was it was pretty profound, and I'm thankful for that experience.
Yeah, you got a little taste of what a confirmation sighting would be like, at least for just a couple of seconds, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, hooray for me. Yeah. So I talk about this, but I mean, when people say, "Have you ever seen anything?" Well, that's about as close as I've gotten. But they asked the same thing with Rene Dahinden. He was one of the original four horsemen of Sasquatchery, and they said, Rene, you've been looking for this thing for 40 years, and you've never found it. And he said, yeah, and maybe I never will. But with the four horsemen of Sasquatchery, these were the guys, the pioneers, and I dedicate my book to them. But these were the guys that were out there in the beginning, the pioneers, before we had computers and microfiche and all this other stuff, and before we had the ability to get on Google and type in Bigfoot and see what it looks like and sounds like, and we could go and do our own research and become experts on Bigfoot, in 15 minutes, with people like Rene Dahinden and Peter Byrne and John Green and Grover Krantz. They were the pioneers. They were out there that would go out there into the field and take the narrative of the witnesses and write it down. And just amazing that this is what they were doing as young men, not drinking, doing drugs, and chasing women, but they were chasing down Bigfoot, trying to figure out what that was. So pretty amazing group of people.
That's more fun any day. Going out for Bigfoot just about beats anything. I miss doing that very much. I don't get to do that very much being here in Las Vegas, but well, I'm pulling for you, Maxim. Maybe one of these days you will see the big hairy dude. Okay, so let's completely shift gears. And I have to say, Maxim, before we jump into this Sheppton Mine situation and all of the things that went along with that, I had such a hard time picking Coleridge and Hoodoo up and finally settling on. There's so many carrots that you were dangling in front of me for me to, and not that you said, oh, you have to pick something from Coleridge and Hoodoo. Is actually my idea. But once I decided to do that, I'm going, there's a lot of good stuff in this book. You cover the Philadelphia experiment, UFOs, Bigfoot, mysticism. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So I just wanted to give you a high five on that, because Coleridge and Hoodoo covers a ton of awesome paranormal stuff.
Yeah, I'm so pleased with that. Coleridge and Hoodoo was published by Beyond the Fray, and it's, there's probably 2 books there, but I just wanted to go and do a sort of an encyclopedia of the paranormal. And what's included there was my friendship with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the people responsible for the Conjuring franchise. And for your listeners, they probably know, but The Conjuring is the most successful horror franchise of all time. 9 motion pictures worth about $2.1 billion. But I had met Ed and Lorraine Warren back in 1988. They were embarking on a 15-city book tour to promote their book, The Haunted. And that was about the Schmurl haunting in northeastern Pennsylvania. That was in my backyard. So I had a chance to meet them, to hang out with them, kept in touch with them over the years. And I would ask Ed about how he did battle with the demons, and just pretty amazing stuff. But with all this stuff in Coleridge and Hoodoo, I do want to say this. And if you were to ask me what's my favorite topic, I try to blend the spiritual and paranormal with the scientific. My biggest kick is what I call Catholic mysticism. And I've done several trainings, several presentations about that with drawing over 100 people each time. But I talk about miracles, apparitions, demonology, exorcisms. I talk about Saint Teresa of Avila, the 17th century Spanish mystic, who claimed that through prayer and meditation, we can reach states of rapture and ecstasy and what she called flight of the soul, or an out of body experience. And the miners in Sheppton experience that out of body experience. But Catholic mysticism, I just think, is just like such a tremendous and powerful thing. I mean, I just really get wrapped into it. If I had the time, I would do a book on that. But again, with miracles, with apparitions, how do they work? All that. I am a big fan of Padre Pio, who was the priest in Italy that had stigmata, and he was bleeding the wounds of Christ. And the Vatican didn't believe it. They thought that Padre Pio was a con artist. I mean, they couldn't believe that thousands of people were coming to his church to either see his bleeding wrist, the stigmata, or they were coming for him to hear their confession. But they thought that he was a con artist and was able to convince thousands of people that his delusions were true. But what the priest did was they wrapped Padre Pio's hands with gauze, and they monitored him for a week, 6, 7 days, and then took off the gauze. They were looking for signs of scabbing, of healing. They wanted to prove that Padre Pio was just as human as you or I. And when they took off the bandages, he was still bleeding. So again, he was bleeding the wounds of Christ. And amazing guy, also noted for bilocation, and not the Bigfoot bilocation, but documentation that Padre Pio was at two places at the same time, that he was there with people that saw him walking and talking, and bilocation. So Padre Pio is an amazing, amazing individual on so many levels. And I mean, he suffered a lot. I mean, even he was such an incredible person, but even the Vatican thought he was a con artist, not a person that was blessed with these gifts from God. So he's a pretty interesting character, Padre Pio.
Yeah, I did an entire episode over on Patreon with my resident demonologist, John Paul Capice, and he actually, I think it's packed away, he said, but he is in possession of one of Padre Pio's gloves. So it's pretty
Wow.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the other one was St. Teresa of Avila. There's documentation that she actually levitated, that the nuns had to hold her down to keep her from levitating. And again, do we have innate powers and abilities? And if you look at the opposite side, those people that we believe are possessed by the devil, the Catholic priest, the exorcist have to determine whether or not the individual is schizophrenic, whether they have schizophrenia or maybe Tourette syndrome or something that mimics this, or if they're actually possessed. And someone who's possessed typically has three abilities, superhuman abilities, the ability to speak in different languages, and also the power of levitation. So that seems to be what's been documented in these cases of actual possession. A lot of people don't believe in the devil or evil. A lot of people believe that that's archaic thinking, that it's the church trying to scare us. If you don't go to church, if you don't be good, the devil's going to get you, all of that. But Pope John Paul II, he was canonized along with Pope John the 23rd, who created the miracle in Sheppton. But Pope John Paul II was an exorcist, and he put together a college for exorcists. He brought in priests from something like 132 different countries to learn the ancient medieval art of exorcism, because Pope John Paul II believed that evil exists and we have to go and do something about it. So, I believe that it does. I believe in a spirit world, a dynamic world that we need to be aware of.
All right, Maxim. So to close this down, if you would please, sir, regale us with everything about the Sheppton Mine disaster and what the two men who survived say they experienced.
Yeah, so in 2016, I published a book called The Sheppton, The Myth, Miracle, and Music. And working title was The Sheppton Mythology. But 3 men were trapped for 2 weeks. Only 2 came out. So the story was an incredible story of human survival. And then it was a story about cannibalism because the townspeople believed that they cannibalized their mate, who was never found. Then there was the story of Pope John the 23rd, who was down there for 2 weeks, and the miners claimed that he saved their lives. Pope John the 23rd was an example of life after death. The Pope died in June of 63. Sheppton took place in August of 63. In all 3 of the Pope's purported miracles, they all happened after he had died. So he was canonized in 2014 along with John Paul II, the exorcist. So Sheppton had themes of the bizarre, of the miraculous. The miners claimed that they saw humanoid creatures. They were able to have the ability to see things in blackness. I mean, they're crawling around on their hands and knees like dogs, sucking in dirt and coal dust, and just amazing that they were able to survive. One fact is that the technology, the rescue technology that they used in Sheppton in 63 was later used in 2010 in the Chilean copper mine disaster. There was a movie called The 33, and those 33 miners were saved by Sheppton mining technology. So anyway, long story short, I had that book published in 2016, and there were a number of elements of the paranormal, and I started to get invited to podcasts. And yes, we had podcasts back in 2016. And I was invited to expos. Australia's Mysterious Universe did a 90-minute program on me and the Sheppton book. And of course, the Skeptical Inquirer did a piece. And it wasn't really a hit piece. I mean, it was really gave me a lot of ink and said that my Sheppton book was the definitive book on Sheppton. But at the end, they said that using Occam's razor, that archaic bit of, I don't know, philosophical judgment, that you use to go and look at these complex things. They believe that the simplest explanation for Sheppton was that the miners were hallucinating. And I contend that you can't use Occam's razor for themes of the paranormal because they're beyond that. They're more complex. You can't distill them down to just one tiny little common denominator like hallucinations. But however, it was those 4 things that just opened up the doors for me to the paranormal. Again, I didn't go looking for it. It found me. And that was 9 years ago. The Sheppton book was in 2016. And since then, I've had numerous books published, and certainly Coal Region Hoodoo is the one that continues to resonate, and the Lost Tribes of Bigfoot is getting a lot of buzz, a lot of positive buzz. And it's just great as an author to be able to find an audience and to have an audience that that is respectful of your research. And I can't be more thankful. The only other thing I want to say is that if anybody is interested in purchasing any of my books, to also please include a review on Amazon and or Goodreads. It really does a lot for us authors, to have that happen.
Yes, reviews help tremendously. Actually, I don't say it enough about my podcast either. So it's the same for authors. Please, guys, if you enjoy a book, there's so much time and effort that goes into all of these passions that we have. Just leave that review. It helps folks out so much. The thing about the Sheppton Mine that for me, besides the fact that caves and really deep, dark places freak me out, but I love the book, The Descent by Jeff Long. It's a fictional book, but there are humanoid creatures in that book that live underground. And of course, the theme of the hollow earth kind of trickles into the Sheppton Mine incident, right? Because they're talking about doors and marble steps and golden cities and people that they're seeing down there. So it's just fascinating to look into that whole incident.
Yeah, it's again, Sheppton mine disaster of 63 probably had the most, paranormal elements of out of body experiences, afterlife experiences, near death experiences, humanoids, et cetera, on and on. And the miners claimed, especially Dave Fallon at the end, and he was very candid. He was very amenable to the press. He wasn't out looking for publicity and promotion, but he would answer the questions. But he said, I've told you everything, but there's one thing that I'll never discuss, and he took that to his grave. So whatever it was that he saw, maybe he was able to peer into another dimension, maybe he saw something, but whatever it was, he respected it for I think for the spiritual or the spirituality that it represented. So who knows what it was, but I think that maybe he was able to cross over and see something that that we rarely see or never see. So I don't know, but Sheppton is pretty amazing. And the thing about cannibalism is, the theory was that in mining lore, the shortest miner would be the one to get it. And Louis Bova happened to be the shortest miner there at Sheppton. But with the 2010 Chilean mine disaster, there were 33 guys. 32 of them were from Chile, but the one dude was from Uruguay. And there were several books written about the Chilean mine disaster, but they said at the end that if anybody was going to be cannibalized, it would be the guy from Ecuador. So anyway, and they wrote several books about that, and they had food rations. Everybody got a little bit of some crackers, milk, and tuna fish. They knew that at a certain point the food rations were going to be gone, and they talked about in these books written about the 33 that they might have to resort to cannibalizing one of their mates, and that was when the guy from Ecuador, his name popped up. So a little bit of dark gallows humor there, but but a true story.
Maxim, is there any part of you that thinks that what he took to his grave with him was the fact that they did, in fact, eat the third man?
I don't think it's that. No, I don't believe that. I think that what happened was I think that there was a horrible avalanche that separated the two miners from the third. And I think that they were separated by mountains of debris, of rock and coal and timbers and everything else. I think they communicated for a while, and then I think the other miners died. But typically, when there was a cave mine disaster, typically they would just bulldoze that mine entrance and make a memorial, and the Catholic priest would come and do the last rites of absolution. They wouldn't go down there to retrieve the body because, one, it was too expensive, and two, it was too dangerous. With the Sheppton mine disaster, there was a lot of pressure on these people, on the unions, to go down there and try to extricate those men, hoping that they were still alive. So Sheppton was unusual that they actually had a rescue attempt that was, just an amazing thing, being able to go down 330 feet through rock and coal. Howard Hughes, the billionaire from Houston, shipped in tungsten drill bits from his operation in Houston. They were flown in on Navy ships or planes. But so Howard Hughes played a part in this. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote On Death and Dying, she played a part because she believed that the miners experienced life after death, i.e., in the guise of Pope John the 23rd. So there were a number of people that were involved in the Sheppton story. Were just amazing, amazing. And the Sheppton mine disaster of 1963 was one of the top stories of the Associated Press until November of 1963, and that was the assassination of John Kennedy. So that was the biggest story of the year, and that, surpassed Sheppton and probably took away some of Sheppton's infamy. And maybe, I think Sheppton's not as recognizable only because it's been surpassed by Kennedy's assassination.
Well, Maxim, let everybody know where they can find you and, of course, your books.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. They could purchase my books from Amazon, of course, or from Beyond the Fray or Hangar One. Or if they would like a signed an autograph copy, they could reach me through www.maximfurek.com, MAXIMFUREK. And just for a heads up, the next up is going to be a book called Paranormal Apocalypse. Is This How It Ends? And that will be published by Hangar One, and I'm hoping to have that completed in the summer of 2025. So I think this is going to be a departure from flying saucers and cryptids and demonology, and it's going to go into another realm, and that's the realm of fear. Again, my preface being that humans are controlled through fear by political groups, religious groups, society, et cetera, et cetera. So we are kept in fear, waiting the apocalypse, waiting for the end times and all that. So that's my book. I mean, it does have a happy ending, but other than that, there's some pain and suffering too. But I think I'm really having fun researching this and putting connecting the dots. So Paranormal Apocalypse, Is This How It Ends? Is the name of the book.
Well, looking forward to that, Maxim. And thank you so much for coming on with me. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. I really appreciate it, and continued success with you with your Into the Fray radio.